It's not possible to talk about the history of horsemanship without talking about the Eurasian steppe. This is the vast grassland connecting Eastern Europe and Asia. For millennia, the steppe served as a conduit between East and West, fostering interactions between diverse groups and disseminating knowledge and innovation. It is hypothesized that the Proto-Indo-European language, from which many modern languages from English to Hindi descended, originated and were spread from the Pontic-Caspian area of the steppe north of the Black Sea. This mirrored the spread of the early horse nation of the Yamnaya. Further east, the Sintashta were believed to have spread another language group, that of Proto-Indo-Iranian speakers. This branch of language includes 300 languages, is spoken by around 1.5 billion people, and spans the Caucasus, South, Central, and Western Asia. They are also credited with horse breeding that furthered the goals of developing traits of docility, strength, and speed in horses. They had two-wheeled chariots, as long as 4,000 years ago, that were driven by horses. More to our interest, it is also hypothesized that the Eurasian steppe, particularly the Pontic-Caspian steppe, current Crimea, southern Russia, and Kazakhstan, was the birthplace of horse domestication and the evolution to chariot use, and ultimately riding as a way to enlarge and facilitate herding, and finally raiding and war. As the various nomadic tribes spread and migrated back and forth throughout the steppe region, the horse carried us. The Botai existed in what is now northern Kazakhstan, and are believed to be the earliest culture that domesticated horses. Further west in the Pontic-Caspian region of the steppe, where the Yamnaya existed, roughly from 3,300 BC to 2,500 BC. They also domesticated horses and are credited by some sources to have been the first riders to develop mounted herding. Archaeologists studying these cultures have a hard time agreeing on who did what, when, or who rode first, but horses were domesticated on the Eurasian steppe, and ultimately ridden on the Eurasian steppe. I'm most interested in looking at horse culture in the Pontic-Caspian area of the Eurasian steppe and the nomadic peoples living there known as the Scythians. The Pontic-Caspian is an area north of the Black Sea in what is now Crimea and southern Russia. I'm writing this in the second year after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and some of the city names appearing in the news were already used in the 4th century BC. The Scythians roamed and essentially ruled over a vast 1.5 million miles of territory over the time period of 7th century to the 3rd century BCE. Historians refer to a very loose group of people with similar lifestyles and social structure as Scythians, so I'll do the same. The Scythians represent a multitude of horse warrior nomad groups. They had a loose confederation of groups and tribes and leaders who shared a common nomadic lifestyle and culture known as the Scythian triad, which are similar yet not identical styles of weapons, horses' bridles, and jewelry and decorative art. The nomadic life, with its shared challenges and communal living, appears to have fostered a more egalitarian society compared to more settled agricultural communities. Everyone lived similarly and moved together. There were no grand palaces or social separation for an elite. They were interdependent, and every individual contributed to the communal activity, such as animal husbandry, hunting, trade, and warfare, likely leading to a strong sense of shared purpose. They were predominantly a horse culture with a deep connection to the horses that they relied on for transportation, herding, and warfare. They had developed mounted fighting tactics along with their use of a recurved composite bow that revolutionized warfare at the time. Their success as horse breeders gave economic strength as they traded with neighboring countries such as Greece and Persia, who purchased the strong and swift riding horse from them. The horse was used for hunting, often partnered with dogs and eagles to catch prey such as deer and hares, which abounded on the steppe. Here is a gold ring found in one of the burial kurgans, depicting a hunter on horseback hunting deer with both a hound and an eagle. They had a very distinctive art style depicting horses, often in gold, and adorning horses' equipment, bridles, and other headgear with gold. Speaking of interdependence, around this time, as I mentioned, were well-established Greek trading posts or colonies, some actually operating as independent city-states. Overall, the relationship between the Greeks and Scythians was characterized by economic interdependence, cultural exchange, and occasional conflict. This interaction played a crucial role in shaping the cultural and economic landscape of the Black Sea region in ancient times. Immensely civilized Greeks and the illiterate, barbaric, nomadic horsemen Scythians were trading partners. The Greek colonies were the intermediaries between the massive hinterland controlled by the Scythians and the Mediterranean world of cities and essentially consumers. The Scythians provided grain. Even then, Crimea was the breadbasket of the world. They provided livestock, furs, and slaves to the Greeks, who in turn offered wine, olive oil, textiles, and luxury goods. There was a group described by Herodotus as royal Scythians, who were centered around the Black Sea, who may have facilitated a lot of this trade of materials from the hinterland, acting as middlemen. Some of these elites adopted elements of Greek lifestyle and culture. Besides exchanging trade goods, there was substantial artistic influence flowing each direction, with Scythian-style animal art influencing Greek artisans, especially in metalwork, while Greek artistic styles were adopted and adapted by Scythian elites among the royal Scythians. They had a completely symbiotic relationship with Greeks, settling in the coastal areas, and the Scythians dominating the steppe, thereby controlling different adjacent ecological zones. Much of what we know about Scythians comes from Greek sources, as they had no written language. Although that information coming largely from the father of history, Herodotus, who did live in the colonies and saw them firsthand. Still, his report may be biased or inaccurate, but recent archaeological evidence bears out a lot that was reported about the Scythians at the time by Herodotus. For one thing, he mentioned that Scythian women were involved in traditional male activities such as riding and hunting, as well as accompanying men to war. The Greeks loved the stories of Amazons. The first literary reference to Amazon was Homer, writing 750 BCE about events that occurred in 1200 BCE. Priam, the Trojan king, mentions that mounted women, the equal of men, supported an army of Phrygians against the Greeks. Here is an image of the mighty Achilles besting the equally mighty Penthesilea and the falling in love with her beauty as she lay dying. In 484, Aeschylus refers to them in a play, the Eumenides. In the 6th and 7th century BCE, they are on vases and other decorative objects, but from 490 BC on, they really took off and were seen everywhere. The Amazon fighters were so fierce they thought it a noble challenge for the Greek heroes to battle an Amazon Heracles, Achilles, Theseus, etc. And images of these one-on-one combats were very popular. They were featured on monumental public sculptures in mosaics and on frescoes on public buildings. Amazons wearing patterned pants and boots, riding horses, shooting bows and hurling spears, swinging battle axes and dying heroically were wildly popular subjects in Greek vase painting. They were to have lived in the exotic lands above and beyond the Black Sea called Scythia. Historians and archaeologists still use that blanket term for which hosted many different semi-related groups of nomadic peoples. Until now, historians believed that the Amazons were fictions of Greeks' imagination. Now, thanks to recent archaeological discoveries across what was ancient Scythia, we have overwhelming proof that women fitting the descriptions in Greek art and literature really did exist. So, there were historical counterpoints to the mythical Amazons. These women were members of a diverse network of culturally related nomadic tribes of Eurasia and beyond. Each of those tribes, of course, have their own names, languages, dialects, and their own history, but they became known to the Greeks as Scythians, and their cultures centered around archery and riding horses. As nomads, they left no written history, so recording them was left to their neighbors and their descendants in archaeology. Long before archaeologists began excavating the graves of real warrior women, the Greeks had already identified them as Scythians. These warlike tribes, they wrote, have no cities and no fixed abode. They live free and unconquered and are so savage that even women take part in war. Amazons were as courageous and fearsome as their husbands. Among these Scythian nomads, the girls learned to ride and handle bows and spears alongside their brothers. They knew how to defend themselves. They knew how to hunt and to fight just like men. The lives of these tough nomadic women were so different from the Greek women of antiquity. In Greece, the women and girls were confined indoors to sew and mind children, and that difference in the two cultures made a great impression on the Greeks. Rumors and descriptions of these horse-riding men and women and their deadly arrows and their expansion throughout Eurasia began to filter back to Greece, perhaps in the Bronze Age, and the Greeks began to directly contact these people in the 7th century BC when the Greek cities began creating trade outposts around the Black Sea. It's easy to imagine how genuine knowledge mixed up with incoherent ideas, the stories bandied about a trading town, curiosity, imagination, and speculation led to all the outpouring of exciting stories and vivid pictures of Amazons. We now know about these people because over 1,000 archaeological excavations of ancient Scythian graves from Ukraine, southern Russia, Caucasus region, and Central Asia. Before DNA testing, it was presumed that anybody buried with arms and weapons had to be a male. However, scientific analysis began to call those assumptions into question, and there have been complete reversals of those opinions. One example was a 4th BC burial in Thrace, current Bulgaria. 2 mounds were discovered in the 1960s, richly outfitted with weapons and armor, gold and silver artifacts, and richly equipped horses. There was a pair of skeletons in each one, which were announced to be a powerful warrior and his wife. In 2010, 50 years later, it was found that all 4 skeletons belonged to women. In fact, since the advent of DNA testing, more than 300 battle-scarred women have been found buried with their weapons. Most of these burial sites are in Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, the Caucasus, and Kazakhstan, the very places the Greeks placed the Amazon homelands. 25 to 40% of Scythian women were active warriors buried with their weapons upon death. Many of those women had battle wounds similar to the men. The grave goods included iron spears, massive armored belts, leather and gold quivers with bronze-tipped arrows, bronze swords and battle axes, necklaces of beads and animal claws, golden earrings and clothes of wool, fur, and silk have been recovered. They had found a girl about age 10 who was buried in iron armor and had crossed spearhead with her. There were 3 women buried 3,000 years ago in 900 BC. One woman was about 30 and was interred sitting in a cross-legged position, bronze sword across her knees and dagger and spear by her feet. The jawbone of her horse and her shield were next to her. She had shown signs of recovering from a battle-axe wound on the side of her head. The second woman in that kurgan had an arrowhead embedded in her skull, wore a necklace of lion or leopard claws. They were horse-riding nomads. Their legs showed the bowing consistent with a lifetime on horseback. This woman was posed in death as if she were riding a horse. Their bodies revealed they had broken bones from dealing with horses and falling from them. All the archaeological evidence points to a level of gender equality unheard of by the ancient Greeks. No wonder their endless fascination with the horse-riding barbaric nomads. The more I learned about the gender equality of the Scythians, the more I wondered why that didn't prevail through the course of time. I am a horse trainer and am familiar with gender equality as men and women in our sport compete as equals. That, however, wasn't always the case. The show jumping rider of great skill in communicating with and using the horse's strength can do the same job regardless of gender. For us, as well as for the steppe nomads, the horse was the great equalizer. The horse's speed and strength combined with the recurved bow made the genders equal in hunting or raiding. That's a topic I would love to explore soon. One fascinating story that came to light as I looked for information was that of Dr. Janine Davis Kimball. As a graduate student studying Iranian art, Janine Davis Kimball knew basically nothing about ancient nomadic peoples, and she never imagined her career would eventually be focused on the enigmatic warrior women who once wandered the Eurasian steppes some 2,000 years ago and provided a historical basis for the myth of the Amazon. Then she happened across carved stone reliefs in one of the palaces of the Archaemedean dynasty, which ruled Persia from 559 to 330 BC. The reliefs depicted scenes of nomads paying tribute to the kings. In contrast to others honoring the rulers, these people were distinctively dressed, wearing soft boots and tall hats, and they were leading horses. Davis Kimball was intrigued by the figures, and she thought she knew where she might look for them. I suspected that I might be able to find some traces of them if I were to go out to the Eurasian steppes, to the north of the Persian Empire, because that is where you would find nomadism. She soon began excavations of the kurgans, or burial mounds, of ancient Eurasian nomads, and became the first American woman to collaborate in archaeological investigations in Kazakhstan. Everything that I excavated was very interesting because it all added to our knowledge, but my first big find was at the 1994 excavation at Porkovka, located in Russia near its border with Kazakhstan, when we discovered artifacts indicating there were women there who were very important within the culture. Finding warrior women who played a prominent role in the nomadic society came as a total surprise to Davis Kimball, and it led her to focus her career on the investigation of the warrior women of the Russian steppes and other cultures. I had no idea that these women existed. In history and in art, for instance, in the stone reliefs of the Persian Archimedeans, there is no indication that women have any particular status. In fact, women are sort of invisible because history is always written by men. But Davis Kimball has found that in reality, warrior women were quite common among ancient Eurasian societies and also among other nomads. Our new evidence shows that women have always had a pretty prominent place in nomadic societies, she says. Over time, moving east, say from 600 BC to 200 BC, they become less nomadic and a bit more settled. Davis Kimball says, their wealth increases. We see that in their burial items. We see strong, powerful women, but their role changes. We find burials of women that still retain cultic artifacts, indicating that they were a priestess of some sort. But there is much more gold and more secular ornamentation, more golden cups, more golden jewelry, elaborate things, and less weaponry. This type of evolution is a normal manifestation of culture. Janine Davis Kimball believes that remnants of the integrated Scythians who evolved into Sarmatian population evolved into and can still be found in the descendants of that conquering horde of Mongols. The Mongols relocated from southern Russia to western China and western Mongolia 150 to 200 years ago, where they reside today. Her hope was to demonstrate that people today lived in Kazakhstan, descended from the Scythians or Sarmatians from 2,000 years earlier. The excavated burial kurgan in Pokrovka is now known as Kurgan 4. The kurgan contained the remains of a young woman about 13 years old who was buried with an array of weapons, including a dagger and bronze-tipped arrowheads. The burial dated from about 500 BC and was associated with the Sarmatian culture who had replaced the Scythians in this region. Remarkably, after consulting with geneticists who analyzed DNA from the girl in the tomb, they found a living genetic match with a blonde-haired girl living in the Altai region of Mongolia. This girl, named Myramgul, was around the same age as the warrior girl when she died. This discovery provided evidence of genetic continuity over the region for 2 millennia and support theories about movement and intermingling of ancient steppe population. This information has been greatly built upon by the increased capabilities of geneticists to trace our ancient movement in recent years. Myramgul's family maintained traditions that seem to echo those of their ancient ancestors, including horsemanship and a high degree of gender equality.